G'day, welcome to Mark's Gospel again. It's great to be back after 2 weeks off I don't get to see you. You get to see me, but I wish I could see you, but I can't. I trust that you've prayed as we look at Mark chapter 7, the second half, and that you've got it open in front of you, Mark 7:24 to 37, I think it is. We're going to be looking at that this morning as we see good news for the outsiders. I think we've all been outsiders at some point in time, haven't we? We've all experienced that situation where we wanted to be part of something, or there was a group of people that we thought we should be part of, and they wouldn't let us belong, or we didn't have the right clothes, we weren't the right person, we didn't have the connections. I think those things happen, and we see that because human beings are tribal. By tribal, I mean we're about people who are on the inside and on the outside. We're about us and them. Human beings are relational. We've always been social creatures. That's the way God made us. But sin twists that so that we become tribal, and we're all about us and people like us, and we're against them and people like them. That's human nature. And what we're going to see in Mark, the second half of Mark 7, is very clearly Jesus addresses that prejudice in the Jewish culture and the Jewish religion of his time. Let's have a look at it. We'll jump in. It's important to notice that we're in a part of the world that is not a Jewish part of the world. So if you're looking at 24, I went to Tyre and Sidon. So they're kind of names that for a Jewish person are symbolic of kind of like enemy peoples, ungodly peoples. And later on we hear about the Decapolis, which is a Greek area, 10 cities, Decapolis. So that was a Roman Greek area. They spoke Greek, they were a Roman civilization. And Jesus is down there and he meets this woman who is a Greek, a Syrophoenician. I don't know what translation your Bible has in front of you. Some translations will say Greek and some will say Gentile, because the word Greek, which is what it is in the original New Testament, it uses the word Hellenis, which means Greek, Hellenica, it means Greek. That kind of stood for everybody else. They used it to kind of mean all the people who weren't Jewish. So I don't know if you remember in Acts, there was that conflict in the church that was sorted out by God through the apostles, where the Greek-speaking widows and the Hebrew-speaking widows were in conflict about who was getting more support from the church. That Greek-speaking meant everybody else. And we see that here, the way the word is used in verse 26. Now the woman was Greek, a Syrophoenician. You see, the Greek is almost unnecessary. A Syrophoenician woman, of course, spoke Greek. Of course she was from that Roman culture, that Roman town. And so why is the word Greek there? Well, unfortunately, when I was a kid, one of the words that was around was wog. So you could be a wog and be Italian or Lebanese or whatever. And I think this word functions in much the same way. It's kind of like one of those people. There's almost a derogatory tone to it. She was Greek, not Hebrew, not a good person, not like us. But she was a particular one, this Syrophoenician. So I think that kind of reveals a little bit to us the thinking of the time. Anyway, her daughter has a demon and she comes to Jesus to ask for help. And what Jesus says is really quite significant. Have a look at what Jesus says. I want you to read it because it's just startling. He says, "Allow the children to be satisfied first, because it isn't right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." What Jesus means by that is, he says, it's almost like he's saying, I've come to the people of Israel, they're God's children, you're an outsider, I'm going to call you a dog, and I'm not going to give you anything because all God's blessings are for God's people and not for you dogs. So the theology is kind of about outsiders and you don't belong, and the language is insulting. He calls her a dog. It's not right to give anything to the dogs. Now, in Bible times, dogs, much as they are now, are scavengers and hunters. So they'll hunt. They're unsafe. A pack of dogs can turn on you while you're walking home, as much as they'll eat rubbish and carrion, and so they stink and they're unsafe. So the Jews kind of had a very derogatory kind of attitude to dogs, and so it's a real strong insult. Not quite as strong an insult as pig for a Jewish person, but not far off. So we've got to ask ourselves the question, why does Jesus say this? Is that what he actually thinks? Or is he being humorous? I read one commentator who thought he was being humorous, and I think, no, that's not very funny at all. I think what Jesus was doing was quoting the ideas of the time to reveal them and show how stupid those ideas are. Because you've got to realise that he's down in this part of the world in the first place. So what's he doing there if he's so against them? But also in the next section, he heals a guy who's from that same area, so not a Jewish person, and he works down there. And if you remember too, what Evra was talking about last week, Jesus was all contradicting what the Pharisees had set up their system, their rules about what was clean and what was unclean. And so Jesus wasn't going to be as concerned about this clean, unclean thing, this we are God's people, you are unclean people. He's not going to be as concerned about that as the Jewish people were. So I don't think he's quoting it because he agrees. I think he's quoting it because he wants to show how wrong they are. And we see that's true because in the next verse, she replies, Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And I think we see in that when Jesus commends her, he actually appreciates and values how she responds. So then he told her, because of this response, you may go. The demon has gone out of your child. He says, I've given you what you want because you responded well. You see, for Jesus, it's not about where you come from or what your background is. It's how you come. You see, she persists. She doesn't give up. She has a faith there that says, he's a guy who can help me, so I'm not going to stop asking. That's the faith that Jesus asked for in the parable of the widow who kept nagging the corrupt judge. But also there's a humility in her position. She doesn't argue when he's rude and says, oh, why would I give it to the dogs? She doesn't argue. She doesn't get upset. She doesn't storm off. She just persists and humbly asks, yes, but this will cost you nothing because it's just the crumbs that fall down. I'm not asking you to take anything away from anybody else, but I'm just asking, please help me. There's a humility as well as a persistence that comes from a genuine faith in this woman. And so Jesus commends her and says, because of that great reply, you can go. Your daughter's okay now. I think Jesus doesn't care where you come from or what your background is or what your pedigree or whether you're in or out, popular or not. He doesn't care about all those things. He cares about humility and faith. He just cares whether you are turning to him or not. We also see that Jesus continues that because in verse 31, he leaves the region of Tyre, he goes down through Sidon and the Decapolis. These are all non-Jewish areas, and he walks through there. It kind of goes the long way to get back to Galilee. And they bring someone who's deaf and dumb, and Jesus heals him as well. What I want to notice is the way Jesus heals him. We tend to focus on the actions that Jesus did, the fingers in the ears and things like that. But what actually is most significant, I think, is that Jesus heals this guy with a prayer. He looks to heaven and calls out in a loud voice, "Be opened." Actually, I've put that loud voice in. He looked up to heaven, sighed deeply, and said to him, "Be opened." It's a prayer. It's an invocation. He's looking to God and asking God to heal this guy. He's saying, "Be opened." And it happens immediately. And to me, that's a signal of God's approval of what Jesus is doing. It's the Father who heals this guy through the work of the Spirit, obviously, but it's the Father who this guy who's not Jewish, not one of the children of Abraham in a genealogical sense, in a racial sense, but nonetheless the Father sees him healed. And then the outsiders see the goodness of Jesus. You see it there? Verse 27, they were extremely astonished and said, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf people hear and the people unable to speak talk." You see, the outsiders there see the goodness of Jesus shining through his actions and his interactions with them. So I think this is kind of like a demonstration of what God is like, that he cares for the people on the outside. He doesn't have kind of us and them, but anybody can come. This is good news for the outsiders. God is not tribal. And in fact, God challenges the tribal nature of Jewish religion of his time. Jesus challenges that. The disciples probably would have thought in those terms before Jesus really challenged them. Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. That answer of faith is all that Jesus is looking for. But the disciples probably would have used the words like, why would you give to him why would you throw to the dogs what belongs to the children? You see, we're all tribal. It's part of our human nature that's been twisted by sin. We all care more about the people who are like us than the people who are different to us. We all care about the people who love us and like us than those who are different to us. That's why Jesus says, love your enemies. Even the Pharisees. The Pharisees are good to those who are good to them, but you love your enemies. Because Jesus wants to break down that tribal nature of human beings. So whether it's in the school classroom, where the mean girls are all about them and pick on anybody else who's different or not cool, whether it's like the cronyism when you're trying to get a job and those who are in this group get all the promotions and those who aren't, the old boys club, or whether it's racism where people who are like me, my skin colour, that's a really easy way to differentiate people because it's kind of obvious. You look like this, you look like that. I like people like this, I don't like people like that. Whether we go through to the politics, and our politics at this moment is very divided. People seem to be unable to hear the value in other people's arguments if it comes from someone on the other side of the political spectrum, because it's all tribal. If you watch any of the stuff going on in America, it's just crazy. Democrats versus Republicans. I'll give you a good example of that. Last year, I think it was, there was an allegation of sexual misconduct made against a Republican nominee to the Supreme Court. And the media and the Democrats were all over that, like every woman must be heard. In the last month, there's been an allegation made against the leading Democrat, who's the most likely nominee for the presidential race. And it's been silenced. So if the accusation comes from our side, we're all over it. If it comes from the other side against our guy, we're deathly silent about it. That's tribalism, where we believe us and our friends and we disbelieve them and their friends. Whether you see that in politics or whether you see it in wars, where it's the extreme example of our tribe versus their tribe. I think that's in all human beings. And that's where a lot of racism comes from. And we get worked up about racism these days, about all the isms these days, but I think in essence that's all it is we're comfortable with people like us, we're uncomfortable with people who are not like us. But the real question I want to ask is, what is your way of thinking, what does your religion do with that? You see, modern feminism makes it worse, not better. Because modern feminism splits men and women even further, and you're no longer an individual, but you're part of that tribe. You're either male or female, you're on my side or you're not. And so we've had the ridiculous situation where, in the name of women's freedom, women's liberation, a woman who chooses to give up her career as a lawyer or an actress is abused by feminists for letting down the sisterhood. And it's like, how dare you just be a mum and let down all your sisters? And that's just wrong, isn't it? Because you're no longer an individual who's allowed to make your own decisions and who's allowed to be what you are, but you're part of that tribe, and that's all you are now. And there's a thing called intersectional politics, intersectionality. You want to stay away from that because you're no longer an individual. You are now just the groups that you belong to. So that doesn't help us. It's not going to get better. And sometimes, often religions make it worse, as in Judaism in this time. Or, it's easy to look at Islam and the way it treats infidels, outsiders. It's okay to kill and enslave infidels. It's not okay to kill and enslave Muslims. In the court of law, The word of a Christian is worth half the word of a Muslim. The word of a woman is worth half the word of a man. There's definite insiders and outsiders. In Hinduism, there's all the hierarchies of the caste system. So those untouchables who are starving to death, that's okay, because that's where they belong. They're not like us. They're not our caste. We deserve all the riches and things, but they deserve the poverty and the illness and the hunger that they're dealing with. What about Christianity? Well, you see here, Jesus deliberately and specifically challenging the prejudices of his disciples. And he shows that this woman has faith, even though she's a dog. Even though she's an outsider, he accepts her and welcomes her in. And in fact, doesn't that characterize Jesus' ministry? Think about how many things he said and how many things he did. Eating with the sinners and tax collectors. Isn't that what they hated him for? All his parables, the lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost son, all about bringing the outsider back. This is what in fact, the mission of God, the mission of Christ, the grace of God is all about bringing the outsider back. So I'm going to leave you with two challenges. Number one, don't ever see yourself as an outsider. If Satan puts that lie in the back of your head, if someone pushes you to the side and wants to ostracize you, if you come to church and you feel like, oh, I don't belong, I don't know the language, I don't dress right, I want you to realize none of that matters. Listen to what Jesus is saying here. What matters is the humility and the faith to turn to him. You do that, you're no longer an outsider, you're one of the family. I want to read something to you, it's beautiful. 2 Peter, let me find it. Maybe you want to look while I'm flicking through. 2 Peter. Peter's after all the Paul books, so 1 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, where am I? Thessalonians, Timothy, Titus. I think we've got to go through Hebrews, James, and then Peter. Here's 2 Peter. Sorry, it's 1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter chapter 2 is where we're going. Listen to this. This is what Peter writes to Christians, to a bunch of Christians. You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his possession, so that you may proclaim the praises of the one who called you out of darkness into his marvellous light. Now, some people think that Peter might have been written to Jews, but it can't be, because listen to what comes next. He says in verse 10 of 1 Peter chapter 2, once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. This is about people who were Gentiles, who were outsiders, who were these Greek-speaking, non-believing, un-Jewish people. They were on the outside. Once you were not a people, once you had not received mercy, but now you have. And so now the truth about Christians is this. This is how God sees you. This is what you are. You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his possession, something he wants to treasure, so that you may proclaim the praises of the one who called you out of darkness. Isn't that beautiful? This is what we are to God. This is what you are to God. So don't let anybody push you to the side. Don't let anybody tell you you don't belong, you're not part of it, you're not to be here. Come to Jesus in faith, in humility. Turn to him, and you belong to him, and you are his, and you are part of us too. Don't let Satan, don't let anyone make you think you're an outsider. Don't listen to that voice in your own head. But the other side of that is, don't make anybody else an outsider, because we can do this too. And let's be honest, churches have been as bad at this sometimes as anybody else. This is our uniform. We wear this kind of a hat on our heads. We've got to wear these kind of skirts or these kind of trousers. We speak in these kind of ways. And if you don't do that, you don't belong. We've made all sorts of things the code about whether you belong or don't. And sometimes it's been really hard for someone from a different background, a different language, a different race, to join into a Christian church. Well, let's say an unchristian church, because this is what Christianity is all about. So let's not be like that. But as a church here at Tamworth Baptist Church, let's be a church that welcomes the outsiders and doesn't have outsiders. If you come in that humility and that faith, you belong. It's one of the things I love about our church. The whole time I've been here nearly 10 years now, The whole time I've been here, this has been a kind of church that just welcomes outsiders in. It's a fantastic church for Koreans, Singaporeans, Indians, Bangladeshis, Karen folk from Burma. I didn't mention them because I kind of forgot that they're not, they're my brothers and sisters, but I don't even think of them as from somewhere else. This church has been fantastic at welcoming people from Iran and getting alongside them, caring for them. It's one of the things I love about our church is that we get that there's no outsiders, that people belong. But we've also got to remember in active ways as well. When there's someone new at church, do we go the extra yard to make them feel welcome? Are we prepared to have open doors to our building as well as to our mind and our relationships, so that someone new, we're prepared to invest in them, give them time. Let's be a church that it's easy to come and be part of, because that seems to be what Jesus is about. People are tribal, and that's brought great grief to our world. But Jesus, in the gospel, is undoing that and changing that, and he's starting with us. I don't know if you have seen Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches in movies or in documentaries or in the news or studied it at school. His most famous speech, I think, he's got a famous letter, but his most famous speech is the dream speech. I have a dream. He had a dream about a future where that tribalism, the racism that was endemic in his country, in that part of the world at that time, when that was gone. Let me read part of it to you. I'm not going to try and do his voice. But I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream. I have a dream that one day right here in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. Martin Luther King got that dream from the Bible. It was the Bible that taught him that this is the way it should be. And it was the Bible that gave him, it was his Christian faith that gave him the courage to persist in that fight, even though it cost him his life. But it was not Martin Luther King who was ever going to achieve that dream. He couldn't make it happen. He was influential. He was politically influential after his death. It was a shocking death that shocked the nation and kind of woke them up and brought about the change. But it wasn't him. Because it's Jesus Christ who makes the outsiders insiders. It's Jesus Christ who brings people from all over the world and makes them a family. And that's why we have to be part of that as well. That's why you have to see yourself as belonging, even when voices or people tell you you're not. And that's why we want to also be welcoming others. Because Jesus says, not dogs, not unworthy, not outsiders, but my people who I treasure, who I died for, that they might live and be my Father's children. God bless you as you think about that, and I hope it encourages you to keep trusting God in a time where we're not connecting much, but we still know that God loves us and God is with us and we belong to him. God bless you.